The butcher who sold no meat. "The curious thing about butchers," observed Lord Peter Wimsey, negotiating his Daimler between a wayward sheep and a distinctly uncharitable pothole, "is that they are, by definition, dealers in death who sustain life. Rather like clergymen, when one considers it properly, though with considerably more honest advertising." "Indeed, my lord," replied Bunter, whose equanimity remained as unruffled as his collar despite the motor car's spirited interpretation of the Dorset countryside. "Though I believe the theological implications of mutton may be somewhat less complex than those of salvation. But consider the etymology, Bunter. Butcher derives from the old French bouchier, meaning one who slaughters he-goats. The goat, as any student of demonology will tell you, has rather unfortunate associations. One might argue that butchers have been unfairly maligned by linguistic accident. The village of Little Wickham materialized through the morning mist like a watercolor left too long in damp weather, all soft edges and uncertain boundaries. It possessed that peculiar English quality of appearing both timeless and somehow apologetic for its own existence. The high street boasted the usual suspects: a post office that doubled as a repository for local gossip, a tea shop with curtains that had witnessed better decades, and a public house called the Lamb and Flag, whose irony was presumably lost on its patrons. What caught Wimsey's attention, however, was the establishment bearing the faded legend S. Blackwood and Sons, Family Butchers Established, 1823. The shop's windows, which should have displayed the morning's offerings with pride, were instead draped in what appeared to be mourning crepe. More peculiar still, a small crowd had gathered outside, their faces bearing that expression of scandalized fascination peculiar to the English when confronted with drama that is both tragic and slightly improper. "I say, Bunter," Wimsey murmured, bringing the Daimler to a halt beside a horse trough that had clearly seen more prosperous times. "It appears our quest for Mrs. Pemberton's excellent seed cake may have been superseded by events of a more stimulating nature." A constable emerged from the butcher's shop, looking rather like a man who had been asked to arrest the laws of physics and found them uncooperative. He approached the Daimler with the careful tread of one navigating a minefield of rural proprieties. "Begging your pardon, sir, but you'll not be wanting to stop here just now. We've had a bit of trouble, if you take my meaning." Wimsey adjusted his monocle with the precision of a jeweler setting a particularly valuable stone. "Trouble, constable? How delightfully vague. Are we speaking of trouble in the meteorological sense, the mechanical sense, or perhaps the more intriguing mortal sense?" The constable, whose nameplate identified him as P.C. Hedges, shifted uncomfortably. "Well, sir, it's Mr. Blackwood, the butcher. Found dead this morning, he was, in his own cold room. Peculiar circumstances, you might say." "Peculiar how?" "Well, sir, that's just it. The shop's been empty of meat for nigh on a fortnight. Not so much as a sausage to be found, though Mrs. Crumpet, that's his daily woman, swears he was doing a roaring trade up until recent. And now," Hedges gestured helplessly toward the shop, "now he's gone and died in there, locked up tight as you please, with no explanation as to how or why." Wimsey's eyebrows performed a small ballet of interest. A butcher who sold no meat. How remarkably philosophical. Rather like Diogenes with his lamp, searching for an honest man in broad daylight. "Tell me, constable, has anyone considered the possibility that Mr. Blackwood had discovered something more elusive than beef? I'm afraid I don't follow, sir." "Truth, constable. Truth. Though I grant you it's considerably less nourishing than a good joint of mutton." Wimsey stepped from the motor car with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to making entrances. "I don't suppose you'd object to an amateur's perspective. I find that death, like fine wine, benefits from a variety of palates." P.C. Hedges looked uncertain. "Well, sir, I suppose there'd be no harm." Though I should warn you, it's not a pleasant sight. Dr. Meredith says he's never seen the like." "How encouraging. I do so enjoy novelty." Whimsy paused at the shop's threshold, noting the brass bell that hung silent above the door. "Tell me, does that bell ring when the door opens?" "Usually, sir. Bit temperamental, though. Sometimes rings on its own, if you take my meaning." "Ghosts, Constable?" "Well, sir, folk do say the old building has its peculiarities. Been a butcher's shop for near on a century, and there's some as thinks the place remembers things it oughtn't." Whimsy smiled with the particular satisfaction of a man who has just been presented with a puzzle worthy of his attention. How perfectly delicious. A haunted butcher's shop with no meat and a dead proprietor. It's rather like Christmas morning for the intellectually curious. The interior of the shop was indeed empty of its usual wares. The hooks hung bare as gallows, their metal surfaces gleaming with an almost surgical cleanliness. The display cases, which should have showcased the day's finest offerings, contained nothing but shadows and the faint, lingering scent of carbolic soap. "Through here, sir." Hedges indicated a door marked "Private" in letters that had once been gold but were now the color of old brass. Beyond lay a narrow corridor leading to the cold storage, its heavy door standing ajar like the mouth of some mechanical tomb. The cold room itself was perhaps 10 feet square, lined with more empty hooks and maintained at a temperature that made their breath visible in small, ghostly puffs. In the center of this Arctic chamber sat Silas Blackwood, or what remained of him. Huck was a small, precise man who appeared to have been arranged rather than fallen. His hands were folded neatly in his lap. His apron was spotless, and his face bore an expression of profound surprise, as if death had arrived with an invitation he hadn't expected. "Fascinating," murmured Whimsy, circling the body with the careful attention of a connoisseur examining a particularly complex vintage. "Tell me, Constable, has anyone remarked upon the curious absence of rigor mortis?" "The doctor mentioned it, sir. Says the cold might have delayed it, but he seemed puzzled." "And the door?" "It was locked from the inside, you said." "Bolted, sir." "Heavy bolt thrown from this side. No other way in or out, save through the shop." Whimsy knelt beside the chair, careful not to disturb the scene, his keen eyes cataloguing details that others might dismiss as irrelevant. A few grains of what appeared to be sawdust near the door, though the floor was otherwise immaculate. A faint smear on the wall as if something had been hastily wiped away. And most curious of all, a small chalk mark on the door frame. Not quite a cross, not quite a letter, but something that suggested both meaning and concealment. "One question, Constable, if I may. This shop bell of yours, the temperamental one, when exactly does it choose to ring unbidden?" Hedges scratched his head. "Funny you should ask, sir. Mrs. Crumpet mentioned it just this morning. Said it rang 3 times yesterday evening, round about 9 o'clock, though she was certain no one had come or gone. 3 times. Whimsy's smile was that of a cat who has just spotted a particularly interesting mouse. How biblical, though I suspect our Mr. Blackwood's resurrection may prove rather more complex than the usual variety." He straightened, dusting off his knees with the care of a man who understood the importance of proper tailoring. "Well, Constable, I believe we have ourselves a genuine mystery. A butcher who sold no meat, found dead in a locked room, with a bell that rings for no one and sawdust where no sawdust should be. It's rather like a riddle posed by the Sphinx, if the Sphinx had developed a taste for British domestic drama. You think there's more to it than meets the eye, sir?" "My dear fellow," Whimsy replied, adjusting his monocle one final time, "there's always more than meets the eye. The question is whether we possess the wit to see it. Now then, I believe a conversation with the redoubtable Mrs. Crumpet is in order. In my experience, daily women see everything and understand more than they let on. Rather like the fates, but with better gossip." As they prepared to leave the cold room, the shop bell gave a single, mournful chime, though no breath of wind stirred the air and no hand had touched the door. Whimsy paused, his head tilted like a bird listening for a distant call. "How perfectly appropriate," he murmured. "Even in death, it seems, Mr. Blackwood insists on having the last word." The shop bell's solitary chime seemed to linger in the air as Whimsy emerged from the cold room, his expression bearing that particular satisfaction of a man who has just been presented with a puzzle worthy of his intellectual appetite. The morning had progressed with the measured pace of rural investigation, where each revelation must be extracted like a particularly stubborn cork from a vintage bottle. Mrs. Crumpet, when located in her spotless parlor above the baker's shop, proved to be a woman whose disapproval had been honed to surgical precision over decades of domestic service. She received them with the grudging hospitality reserved for gentlemen who asked impertinent questions at inconvenient hours. "Mr. Blackwood, my lord." She settled her considerable frame into a chair that protested audibly. "A changed man these past weeks, and not for the better. 15 years I've been doing for him, and never once has that shop been empty of meat. Pride himself on his joints, he did. Best beef in 3 counties, he'd say, and charge accordingly. Yet recently the hooks hung bare," Whimsy observed, accepting tea that possessed all the warmth and charm of the North Sea in January. "Bare as a baby's bottom, begging your pardon. Not so much as a sausage to be found, though he'd polish those hooks like they held the crown jewels." Muttering to himself he was, about accounts and debts and how some folk would get their comeuppance. And the smell, my lord. Not meat, mind you, but carbolic. Enough to make your eyes water. Said cleanliness was next to godliness, but there's clean and there's obsessed. The bell, Mrs. Crumpet. You mentioned it rang thrice yesterday evening. Her teacup rattled against its saucer with the sound of nervous china. 3 times, my lord, clear as church chimes. I was finishing the washing up when it started. 8:30 by the kitchen clock. Rang once, then again after a moment, then a 3rd time, each ring lasting longer than natural. Gave me quite a turn, especially with no soul at the door. I looked twice, I did, and the street was empty as a tomb." "You were certain, Mr. Blackwood was present?" "Oh, yes, my lord. Sent me away sharp at 8, he did, saying he had private business to attend. But I heard him moving about in the back room, shifting things, and once I thought I heard him talking to someone, though I never saw nobody come or go." Young Timothy Wicks, discovered attempting to coax cooperation from a particularly obstinate bicycle outside the post office, possessed that nervous energy peculiar to boys who have witnessed more than they understand. His mother hovered nearby with the anxious attention of one expecting catastrophe. "Mr. Blackwood, sir." Timothy addressed his boots with the concentration of a scholar parsing Latin. Changed he had. Used to be regular as clockwork with his orders, beef from Morrison's farm, lamb from the Wickham estate. But these past weeks, nothing. Told me my services weren't required, but paid me a shilling to keep quiet about his business. What manner of business? Folk coming and going at odd hours, sir. Not customers. These had worried faces and carried papers, and he'd taken to staying late, lights burning past midnight. The shop bell always rang when I pushed the door, always, but Mrs. Crumpet said it didn't ring last night when she went in. Peculiar, that. Whimsy's monocle caught the light with interest. The bell's behavior has become selective, it seems. Tell me, Timothy, did you notice anything about Mr. Blackwood's timekeeping? Kept his clock fast, sir. 7 minutes by the church. Said punctuality was a butcher's virtue, then locked up whenever he pleased, and he took the big cleaver from the block 3 days past, said he didn't trust it out of his sight. Odd talk for a butcher, sir. Miss Penelope Thornbridge received them in the vicarage drawing-room, a space that managed to convey both Christian charity and aristocratic disdain in equal measure. She possessed the bearing of one accustomed to organizing other people's lives, whether they required it or not. Mr. Poole. Blackwood had become quite impossible, she pronounced, as if the man's recent death was merely the final act of social impropriety, presumptuous and grasping. You must understand, Lord Peter, our family has maintained certain standards in this village for 3 centuries. Mr. Blackwood seemed to have forgotten his proper place. In what manner? He had the audacity to offer my brother financial advice. Financial advice? From a tradesman. My brother is a man of God, not commerce. I handle all temporal matters for the vicarage, and I can assure you we require no counsel from butchers, however prosperous they imagine themselves. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured sherry from a decanter that had clearly seen more elegant days. There were whispers, you understand, about his lending money to those in temporary difficulties. Not at Christian rates, I'm told. The sort of business that attracts desperate people at inconvenient hours. Dr. Meredith, encountered at his surgery while tending to the village's collection of imaginary ailments, proved refreshingly direct in his observations. His hands bore the permanent stains of his profession, and his eyes held the weariness of one who had seen too much of human frailty. Blackwood's death puzzles me considerably, he admitted, washing his hands with methodical thoroughness. No obvious cause, heart failure perhaps, but in a man of his apparent health it seems unlikely without provocation. The positioning troubled me most. People who suffer cardiac episodes collapse where they stand. Blackwood appeared to have simply stopped, as if someone had extinguished a candle. And his recent behavior? He'd become rather inquisitive about his neighbor's private affairs. Made appointments to discuss what he termed matters of mutual interest. I found his manner presumptuous, though I attributed it to the eccentricity of solitary living. He seemed remarkably well informed about the financial circumstances of various residents, unnaturally so. One final question, Doctor. You examined the scene this morning? Indeed. The curious detail was his boots, damp at the soles, though the cold room floor was bone dry when I arrived. He'd been somewhere else before settling down to die. And there was a faint odor, carbolic chiefly, but something else I couldn't identify. Not medicinal, but institutional, perhaps. As they departed the surgery, Whimsy paused at the village notice board, where a small card caught his attention. Private loans arranged, discretion assured, reasonable terms. The handwriting was precise, familiar, and bore no signature. Fascinating, he murmured to Bunter. It appears our Mr. Blackwood had discovered a more lucrative trade than butchery, though I suspect his customers may have found his definition of reasonable rather more flexible than advertised. The afternoon shadows were lengthening as they returned to the Daimler, the village settling into that peculiar English quiet that suggests secrets digesting slowly beneath the surface of respectability. Whimsy adjusted his monocle thoughtfully, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to arrange themselves in his mind like notes of a complex musical composition. Tell me, Bunter, he said as they prepared to depart, what strikes you as the most significant detail in our morning's collection of revelations? If I may venture an opinion, my lord, it would be the matter of the bell. A mechanism that rings for some, but not others, suggests either supernatural intervention or mechanical manipulation. Given your lordship's preference for rational explanations, I would incline toward the latter. Precisely, Bunter. And mechanical manipulation implies human agency with specific purpose. The question becomes, who possessed both the knowledge and the motive to orchestrate such an elaborate deception? Whimsy smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a cat who has spotted a particularly interesting mouse. I believe our next conversation should be with the estimable Mr. Jeremiah Potts. Something tells me his grievances against our deceased butcher may prove more illuminating than the local constabulary suspects. The afternoon had settled into that peculiar quality of suspended anticipation that characterizes English villages, when scandal ripens like fruit ready for harvest. As Whimsy and Bunter made their way back toward the village center, they encountered P.C. Hedges, emerging from the post office with the satisfied expression of a man who believes Providence has delivered justice directly into his capable hands. "Ah, Lord Peter," Hedges called, his voice carrying the unmistakable note of triumph. "Most fortuitous timing, sir. I believe we've identified our culprit. Mr. Jeremiah Potts, former business partner to the deceased, and nursing a grievance the size of Yorkshire." Whimsy paused, adjusting his monocle with the precision of a man preparing to examine something potentially fascinating. "Indeed? How gratifyingly efficient. And what evidence has led to this remarkable conclusion?" "Well, sir, it's quite straightforward." Hedges consulted his notebook with the gravity of a magistrate pronouncing sentence. "Potts and Blackwood were partners in a failed venture some years back, a piggery that succumbed to swine fever. The quarrel over losses became public knowledge, with accusations flying on both sides. Blackwood accused Potts of mismanagement, while Potts claimed Blackwood had cheated him through usurious lending practices. They found Jeremiah Potts in his modest cottage garden, attacking a patch of turnips with the methodical intensity of a man working out considerable frustration on innocent vegetables. He was a spare, weathered individual whose face bore the permanent expression of one consistently disappointed by life's offerings. His clothes, though clean and carefully mended, spoke of reduced circumstances and stubborn pride. "Mr. Potts," Whimsy approached with the careful courtesy reserved for potentially explosive situations, "I wonder if we might discuss your former partner, Mr. Blackwood." Potts straightened, his grip tightening on the hoe handle. "Come to arrest me, have you?" "I suppose it was inevitable. A poor man with a public grievance makes a convenient target when gentlemen need their mysteries solved expeditiously." His voice carried the bitter dignity of one who had learned to expect the worst from authority. "Neither arresting nor accusing appears on today's agenda," Whimsy replied pleasantly, "though I confess considerable curiosity about the nature of your disagreement with the deceased." "Disagreement?" Potts barked a laugh devoid of humor. "Polite word for wholesale theft. 10 years I invested in building that business, then Silas discovers there's more profit in lending money than selling meat. Suddenly I'm surplus to requirements, bought out for a fraction of my share's worth, then told I should be grateful for his generosity. Yet you remained in Little Wickham. Where else would I go? This is my home, Lord Peter. My father's buried in that churchyard, and his before him. I'll not be driven out by a jumped-up tradesman with delusions of grandeur." Potts resumed his assault on the turnips with renewed vigor, though I'll admit to satisfaction watching his grand schemes crumble. Empty shop, nervous creditors, and that bell ringing for ghosts. You were observed near his establishment yesterday evening. "Aye, walking past. Nothing criminal in using public streets, last I heard." Potts paused, his expression growing thoughtful, though I'll grant something was odd about the place. Lights burning in the back room, shadows moving about, but no customers. And that bell, heard it myself, 3 times clear as church chimes, though I saw no soul at the door. Whimsy's eyebrows performed their familiar dance of interest. "What time was this?" 8:30 by my watch, though I keep it deliberately slow. Old butcher's habit. Better early than late with perishables." Potts leaned on his hoe, anger giving way to puzzlement. Strangest thing was the smell. Not meat, mind you, but something sharp and clean, like the county hospital where my late wife spent her final months. You don't forget that particular combination of carbolic and desperation. You have knowledge of Mr. Blackwood's shop mechanics, I presume? Worked there long enough? That bell's always been temperamental, Rings with strong wind, sometimes on its own. Easy enough to silence if you know the trick. Slip a bit of card under the clapper as you open the door, or wedge it with cork. Any fool who's worked a shop knows that much. P.C. Hedges appeared with the purposeful stride of authority about to be exercised. "Mr. Potts, I'm afraid you'll need to accompany me for formal questioning. We have witnesses placing you at the scene, and your public threats against the deceased constitute clear motive." Potts set down his hoe with deliberate care, maintaining his dignity despite circumstances. "I didn't kill Silas Blackwood, though I'll not pretend to mourn his passing. But I'll tell you this. Whatever happened in that cold room wasn't the work of an angry former partner. It was something cleverer and considerably more calculating." As Hedges led Potts away, Wimsey stood thoughtfully in the cottage garden, his gaze fixed on the abandoned turnips. The afternoon light was acquiring that golden quality peculiar to English autumn, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began their evening call. "How remarkably convenient, Bunter," he murmured. "The constabulary has their suspect, the village its scandal, and everyone appears satisfied with the arrangement. Quite extraordinarily tidy." "Indeed, my lord. Though I observe that overly tidy solutions often conceal rather untidy truths." "Precisely. Mr. Potts, for all his obvious bitterness, strikes me as a man inclined toward honest confrontation rather than elaborate deception. The question becomes, who benefits from his convenient availability as a scapegoat?" Wimsey adjusted his monocle thoughtfully. "I suspect, Bunter, that our investigation has barely begun. The real mystery lies not in who wished Silas Blackwood dead, but in how they accomplished the deed while ensuring someone else would bear the consequences." The evening shadows lengthened across Little Wickham as Wimsey stood contemplating the butcher's shop, now sealed and silent in the gathering dusk. The arrest of Jeremiah Potts had provided the local constabulary with that comfortable sense of completion so beloved by those who prefer their mysteries wrapped in regulation paper and tied with official string. Yet Wimsey found himself increasingly enchanted by the loose threads that refused such tidy arrangement. "The curious thing about obvious solutions, Bunter," he observed, adjusting his monocle to catch the last rays of sunlight, "is their remarkable tendency to obscure the genuinely interesting questions. While our good constable celebrates his capture of the village's most convenient villain, I find myself wondering about more esoteric matters, such as why church bells should suddenly develop opinions about butchers' shops." "Indeed, my lord. The mechanical sympathies of inanimate objects do seem rather selective in their manifestations. Their first destination was the church tower, where they discovered Mr. Grimshaw, the verger, attending to the ancient clockwork with the devotion of a high priest tending sacred mysteries. He proved to be a man whose existence revolved around the precise temporal rhythms of parish life, and he received Wimsey's inquiries with the cautious courtesy reserved for gentlemen whose questions might venture into theological territory. "The bells, my lord." Grimshaw polished a brass gear with meditative precision. "Saint. Michael's chime has marked the hours for this village these 60 years past, never varying more than a minute. Though I must confess, she runs 7 minutes fast, a peculiarity we've grown rather fond of. Keeps the congregation punctual, if nothing else. And the quarter chimes, do they possess similar reliability? Ah, that's where matters become more atmospheric, you might say. The sound carries differently depending on wind and weather, sometimes clear as crystal, other times muffled or delayed. The smaller bells particularly. They can be quite temperamental about making themselves heard in thick-walled buildings like our butcher's establishment." Wimsey's eyebrows performed their familiar dance of interest. "Temperamental how, precisely?" "Well, my lord, sound has its own peculiar habits. A bell that rings clear in open air might whisper like a ghost when heard through stone walls. And if there's a draught, or certain atmospheric conditions." Grimshaw gestured helplessly at the mysteries of acoustics. I've heard our quarter chimes echo back from the valley walls on still evenings, creating quite a symphony of confusion. Returning to the butcher's shop, Whimsy began a methodical examination that would have done credit to a natural philosopher. He positioned himself near the shop bell, studying its mounting and the curious way it trembled in the evening breeze without quite achieving sound. "Observe, Bunter," he said, gently striking the bell with his finger. The resulting chime possessed an oddly resonant quality, lingering in the air far longer than one might expect from such a modest instrument. Remarkable how sound behaves in confined spaces. This bell appears designed to announce arrivals with considerable enthusiasm. He moved to the cold room, examining the chalk mark on the door frame with renewed interest. This symbol continues to intrigue me. Not decorative, certainly. More like a calibration mark, the sort of notation one might make to ensure precise positioning. Opening the cold room door to various angles, Whimsy discovered that each position produced subtly different acoustic effects. At one particular angle, precisely where the chalk mark indicated, a faint draft drew through the passage, and the shop bell responded with an almost inaudible tremor. Physics courting mystery, Bunter. The door at this precise angle creates a sympathetic resonance. Add the church's quarter chimes at the proper pitch, and our temperamental bell might well ring for no visible cause. Rather like a séance, but considerably more scientific. Most ingenious, my lord. Though it suggests someone possessed detailed knowledge of both the shop's acoustics and the church's timing. Precisely. Whimsy knelt to examine the sawdust scattered near the threshold. And this beach sawdust in a shop that has sold no meat for a fortnight raises equally intriguing questions. Beach is used for packing delicate items. China, papers, things requiring careful protection during transport. Their investigation of the premises revealed another curious absence that had escaped official notice. Despite the warmth of the September afternoon, not a single fly buzzed about the establishment. The windows, though grimy, showed no accumulation of dead insects, and the air possessed that peculiar sterility found in hospitals rather than food shops. The absence of our six-legged friends troubles me considerably, Whimsy mused, examining the spotless surfaces. Even the cleanest butcher's shop should attract some aerial interest, particularly one that has recently housed meat. Their complete absence suggests either supernatural intervention or the liberal application of substances they find discouraging. A visit to Tripe & Son, chemists, confirmed that Blackwood had indeed purchased unusual quantities of carbolic acid and fly papers 3 days prior. Enough, according to young Mr. Tripe, to sterilize half the county. Yet no trace of fly papers remained in the shop, and the carbolic scent, while present, seemed oddly faded for such recent application. "The pattern emerges, Bunter," Whimsy observed as they concluded their examination. A shop systematically emptied of its usual commerce, treated with industrial quantities of disinfectant, and equipped with acoustic arrangements designed to create the impression of mysterious visitations. Add our convenient scapegoat lurking in the vicinity, and we have all the elements of a rather sophisticated theatrical production. You suspect that death itself was similarly choreographed, my lord? I suspect, Bunter, that Mr. Blackwood's demise was the culmination of a performance designed to achieve very specific effects. The locked room, the mysterious bell ringing, the convenient witness testimony, all arranged with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. The question becomes, who possessed both the knowledge to orchestrate such elaborate deception and the motive to see it through to its grisly conclusion? As they prepared to leave, the shop bell gave a single, mournful chime, though no hand had touched the door. Whimsy paused, his expression thoughtful. "Even in death," he murmured, "our butcher continues to provide instruction in the art of misdirection. Though I fancy, Bunter, that tomorrow's investigations will reveal considerably more about the puppeteer than the puppet show." The morning arrived with that particular clarity of English autumn when shadows possess definite edges and the air carries sound with crystalline precision. Whimsy had spent the night in contemplation of temporal mysteries, and he approached the dawn with the methodical enthusiasm of a scholar preparing to dissect a particularly complex theorem. "Time, Bunter," he announced over breakfast at the Lamb and Flag, "is the most democratic of witnesses." Unlike human testimony, which bends to convenience and fear, chronometers maintain their relentless honesty. The question becomes whether our various witnesses have been equally precise in their temporal observations. Armed with his pocket watch, a marvel of Swiss engineering synchronized that morning by wireless signal, Whimsy embarked upon a systematic reconstruction of the previous evening's events. His first destination was St. Michael's Tower, where Mr. Grimshaw confirmed his earlier confession. The church clock ran precisely 7 minutes fast by Greenwich Standard, a peculiarity maintained these 6 years past. "We shall conduct a small experiment, Bunter," Whimsy announced, positioning his valet in the butcher's shop with the cold room door set to the chalked angle. At each quarter hour, Grimshaw would encourage the bell ropes in their customary duty. If the shop bell possessed musical sympathies with St. Michael's chimes, science would reveal them. At 8:30 by the church clock, 8:23 by Greenwich, the quarter chime floated across the green. Bunter reported a tremor in the shop bell so slight as to be nearly imaginary. At 3/4 past, 8:38 real time, a distinct chime sounded in the empty establishment. At the hour itself, when the quarter tune preceded the count of 9, the bells spoke again, more softly, as though answering reluctantly to an insistent caller. 3 rings, spaced with ecclesiastical regularity. "Remarkable," murmured Whimsy. "A haunting conducted by metronome." With this acoustic revelation warming his satisfaction, he proceeded to recalibrate the village's temporal geography. Mrs. Crumpet's kitchen clock, examined over bracing tea and moral discourse on butchering's decline, proved 4 minutes slow by Greenwich. Her 8:30 accordingly migrated to 8:34 real time. Under gentle pressure, she admitted the 3 mysterious rings might have been over a spell, my lord, near on 3/4 of an hour, if one counted the washing up proper. Young Timothy Wicks, discovered attempting mechanical negotiations with his bicycle, provided crucial testimony about Blackwood's altered schedule. "Sent word he'd be closing early yesterday, sir, around 7:30 by his shop clock, but that clock always ran fast, 7 minutes by the church, making it 14 minutes fast by proper time, so when he dismissed Mrs. Crumpet at 8 o'clock by his timepiece, it was actually 7:46 real time." Dr. Meredith, consulted at his surgery with professional precision, offered medical evidence that complicated the timeline considerably. "Based on the body's condition and the cold room's temperature, I estimate death occurred between 9 and 10 o'clock. Yet circumstantial evidence suggests Blackwood remained active until at least 8:30. The discrepancy troubles me professionally. You examined the scene at what time precisely?" 7 o'clock this morning, to the minute. The body had been in that cold room approximately 9 to 10 hours, by my medical calculation. Miss Penelope Thornbridge, received with her customary combination of aristocratic courtesy and barely concealed impatience, confirmed hearing the mysterious bell ringing at 8:30 while tending her roses. 3 times, clear as our own church bells, most irregular for tradesmen to conduct business at such hours, though I suppose desperate circumstances require desperate measures. As Whimsy compiled these testimonies, a pattern emerged that challenged the apparent simplicity. Mrs. Crumpet heard bells at 8:34 real time, coinciding with the church's 3/4 chime. Timothy observed the shop darkened by 7:30, with mysterious activity confined to the back room. Dr. Meredith's medical assessment placed death between 9 and 10 o'clock, while multiple witnesses confirmed suspicious bell activity at 8:30 by various timepieces. "The chronology presents fascinating contradictions, Bunter," Whimsy observed, consulting his notes with scholarly precision. If we accept the medical evidence placing death after 9 o'clock and the witness testimony about bell ringing at 8:30, we must conclude that Blackwood survived his mysterious encounter by at least 30 minutes. Yet the locked room suggests no departure occurred after the fatal meeting. Unless, my lord, the fatal encounter occurred considerably later than the bell-ringing incident. Precisely. Which raises the intriguing possibility that the bell ringing was entirely separate from the murder itself. A deliberate misdirection designed to establish false witness testimony, while the actual deed occurred during a later, safer hour, when the village slept peacefully. Whimsy paused beside Blackwood's shop, studying the regulator clock visible through the window. Note the beautiful precision of our temporal deception, Bunter. The church clock's 7-minute advancement, combined with individual timepiece variations, creates a symphony of contradictory evidence. Someone with intimate knowledge of village timekeeping habits orchestrated multiple witnesses to confirm suspicious activity at 8:30 while conducting their actual business during the safety of a later hour. The acoustic arrangement suggests considerable preparation, my lord. Indeed. The chalk mark, the precise door positioning, the systematic elimination of the shop's usual commerce, all elements of an elaborate theatrical production. Our murderer possessed not only detailed knowledge of acoustics and timekeeping, but remarkable confidence in human nature's tendency to accept supernatural explanations for mechanical phenomena. As they prepared to depart, the shop bell gave its familiar solitary chime, though no hand had touched the door. Whimsy smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a mathematician discovering an elegant proof. Time, Bunter, has been industriously employed as an accessory after the fact. Our witnesses have sworn accurately to different hours, which proves as fatal to truth as deliberate perjury. Tomorrow, I believe, we shall discover precisely what secret required such elaborate temporal camouflage to protect. The temporal mysteries having yielded their mathematical secrets, Whimsy found himself contemplating the more fundamental question of human motivation. The elaborate acoustic deception surrounding Blackwood's death suggested stakes considerably higher than mere commercial rivalry, something worth the risk of theatrical murder. "The curious thing about village respectability, Bunter," he observed as they approached the sealed butcher's shop, "is its remarkable capacity for concealing the most extraordinary improprieties. I suspect our Mr. Blackwood's transformation from purveyor of beef to conductor of mysterious bell concerts may have involved pursuits rather more lucrative than legitimate commerce." P.C. Hedges, summoned with his official keys, proved amenable to scholarly investigation. "The deceased's private papers, my lord." "Certainly. Though I warn you there's nothing remarkable in the front office. Just the usual collection of receipts and such domestic trivia as accumulates in any tradesman's establishment." The back office presented a respectable facade of ledgers pertaining to joints and chops that had not graced the premises in weeks. Whimsy lifted the main account book, noting its premature conclusion. "Observe, Bunter, the legitimate accounts ceased precisely a fortnight ago. Either Mr. Blackwood abandoned profit as vulgar, or he discovered commodities less perishable than mutton." Bunter, who approached furniture as if it might confess under proper examination, studied the paneling behind the desk with professional interest. "A recent disturbance here, my lord." The varnish shows where a blade has eased the wood. With Hedges witnessing officiously, Bunter applied delicate pressure along the join. The panel surrendered with a whispered sigh, revealing a leather-bound ledger, a small cash box cushioned in familiar beech sawdust, and several manila envelopes tied with legal precision. "Ah," murmured Whimsy, opening the hidden ledger. "Pecunia non olet, though this particular money reeks distinctly of carbolic and desperation." The pages revealed a financial landscape of remarkable sophistication. Rather than names, entries bore initials and symbols, PT, DM, AW, and most significantly, a small bell drawn beside certain appointments. Columns recorded sums advanced and received, with interest rates that would have impressed Shylock. Against each entry, times were marked in ecclesiastical notation: Q1, Q2, Q3, or H, the church's quarter chimes providing Blackwood's appointment schedule. "Church quarters," Wimsey said softly. "Our butcher kept his secondary business synchronized to Saint." Michael's music. Q3, 3/4 past the hour, and here, 3 bells beside PT on successive days last week. Most industrious. The cash box yielded Bank of England notes, several pawn tickets, and promissory documents that made Wimsey's eyebrows perform elaborate choreography. A signet ring bore the Thornbridge arms, discreet but unmistakable. Dr. Meredith's professional letterhead appeared on a desperate plea for extension in consideration of medical circumstances, with an amount representing a year's clerical salary. Blackmail masquerading as banking, Wimsey observed. How remarkably entrepreneurial. The envelopes contained correspondence revealing Blackwood's systematic intelligence network. Letters from tradesmen detailed neighbors' credit difficulties. Reports from domestic servants, purchased with modest financial incentives, provided intimate family knowledge. The butcher had constructed comprehensive files on village vulnerability. Most disturbing was a folder marked Pressure Applications, containing not numbers but leverage. Vicarage Fund Irregularities, PT. Medical Supply Purchases, DM. Estate Inheritance Questions, AW. Each entry bore dates and Blackwood's distinctive bell symbols. Their first confrontation was with Miss Penelope Thornbridge, who received them in the vicarage drawing-room with the rigid composure of one expecting unpleasant revelations. When Wimsey placed her signet ring upon the mahogany table, her carefully maintained poise faltered momentarily. "A most distasteful subject, Lord Peter," she said, her hand closing protectively over the ring. "If you imagine this reflects upon my conduct—" "It reflects, Miss Thornbridge, upon the unfortunate tendency of church roofs to require repair when donations fail to materialize." "The choir fund deficit?" Her spine straightened with aristocratic defiance. "A temporary arrangement. My brother troubles himself little with arithmetic. I manage all temporal affairs. Mr. Blackwood offered assistance during our difficulties, though his terms proved onerous. He suggested transparency was Christian virtue, while hinting that constabulary views of fund irregularities might prove less charitable. At what time did you last meet with him?" 3 days past, at his insistence. Q3 by his peculiar scheduling. I refused his final demands. I was not present last evening, Lord Peter. I spent the hours composing appeals to parishioners who appreciate Buck without contributing to building maintenance. Dr. Meredith, encountered at his surgery, displayed the exhausted candor of one beyond pretense. "Yes, I borrowed," he admitted heavily. "Hospital accounts for my wife's final illness exceeded my resources. Blackwood advanced what banks would not consider, though his interest accumulated with mathematical precision. He suggested medical board inquiries into certain pharmaceutical purchases might prove professionally awkward. Your whereabouts yesterday evening? A difficult confinement in Upper Stoke. Mrs. Pritchard will confirm my presence from 9 until past midnight, though I confess no grief at Blackwood's passing. He enjoyed his power considerably." Returning to the hidden ledger, Wimsey noted the rectangular dust pattern on the desk surface. "Something was removed recently, Bunter. The beach sawdust suggests our butcher packed his most sensitive documents as carefully as china. Whoever visited him last may have shared that delicacy. The bell symbols appear throughout these records, my lord. Someone familiar with his appointment system could have anticipated his schedule precisely. Indeed. And someone with legal training might recognize which documents required permanent removal." Wimsey closed the ledger thoughtfully. "We observe a comprehensive secondary commerce, Bunter. Mr. Blackwood discovered that human necessity provides more reliable profit than animal husbandry. His clients included those least able to endure exposure and most desperate to prevent it. One notes also, my lord, the systematic nature of the operation. This required considerable time and organization to implement. Precisely. Such systematic exploitation suggests our murderer faced not passionate fury, but the calculated terminus of a carefully considered campaign. Someone possessed both intimate knowledge of village secrets and the desperate necessity to silence them permanently. Whimsy adjusted his monocle with satisfaction. Tomorrow, I believe, we shall discover exactly how legal training and village respectability combine to produce such remarkably creative justice. The revelation of Blackwood's clandestine financial empire had transformed Little Wickham from a sleepy village into a map of hidden desperation and carefully concealed vulnerability. Yet Whimsy found himself increasingly fascinated not by the human motivations that such discoveries revealed, but by the mechanical precision with which those motivations had been translated into murder. "The curious thing about elaborate deceptions, Bunter," he observed as they returned to the sealed butcher's shop in the gathering dusk, "is their tendency to leave fingerprints in the most unexpected places. While our murderer has proven remarkably sophisticated in matters of human psychology, I suspect the physical evidence may prove rather more forthcoming about their identity." Young Timothy Wicks, encountered once more wrestling with his recalcitrant bicycle, provided the crucial detail that had been nagging at Whimsy's consciousness. "The cleaver, sir. Mister?" Blackwood's pride and joy it was, heavy as sin and sharp enough to split conscience from convenience. Grandfather's cleaver, he always said, worth more than money. But 3 days past, he took it from the block and said he couldn't trust it out of his sight. Yet no cleaver appeared among his effects. "No, sir, and that troubles me considerable. That cleaver lived on the front block for 15 years, polished bright every morning. Left a proper impression in the wood, it did. Rectangular, precise as a carpenter's measurement." Whimsy examined the butcher's block with renewed interest, noting the pristine outline where the cleaver had rested. The surrounding surface bore the accumulated scars of honest commerce, yet the cleaver's impression remained unmarked, protected by constant presence until recent removal. "Observe this chalk mark on the cold room door, Bunter," he said, producing his pocket ruler with scholarly precision. Not merely decorative, but remarkably specific. Precisely 3½ inches from the door frame, the exact width of a heavy cleaver's blade. The implications crystallized with mathematical certainty. Positioned at the chalk mark's indication, with its handle resting on the floor where faint scuff marks remained visible, the missing cleaver would have held the door at precisely the angle required for acoustic resonance with Saint Michael's chimes. "A mechanical accomplice?" Whimsy murmured with satisfaction. "Our murderer required the door positioned exactly so, not merely for acoustic effect, but for timing precision. The cleaver served as both weight and measure, ensuring the door remained at optimal angle while the church bells triggered their ghostly echoes. The shop bell itself revealed secrets under closer examination. Its clapper bore faint scratches, parallel marks suggesting recent contact with something flat and metallic. When Whimsy inserted a calling card beneath the mechanism, the bell fell silent despite vigorous door movement. Remove the card, and normal function returned. "Simple misdirection," he explained to Bunter. "Silence the bell for clandestine entry, position the cleaver for acoustic timing, then remove both card and cleaver after the performance. The village hears mysterious chimes at 8:30, while our murderer maintains an unshakable alibi elsewhere." The beach sawdust near the threshold took on new significance when examined through his magnifying glass. The pale grains were not random debris, but deliberate placement, providing traction on potentially slippery surfaces and absorbing any moisture that might betray recent activity. "Consider the sequence, Bunter," Whimsy said, settling thoughtfully into the chair where Blackwood had been discovered. Our murderer arrives during legitimate business hours, perhaps as early as 7:30. The cleaver is positioned, the bell silenced, and Blackwood is persuaded to remain in this chair until the appointed hour. The door is set to its precise angle, creating our acoustic chamber. But the timing mechanism, my lord. That's where our murderer's professional training becomes apparent. Something was required to maintain the door's position until the crucial moment, then release it for the bell-ringing performance. Note these faint watermarks on the floor, circular, as if from a container. Ice, Bunter. A block of ice, readily available from medical supplies, positioned to hold the door mechanism until natural melting triggered the acoustic sequence. The technical elegance of the scheme impressed even Whimsy's considerable appreciation for criminal ingenuity. The murderer had created a mechanical alibi. Witnesses would swear to mysterious bell-ringing at 8:30, while the actual death occurred hours later under cover of village slumber. The missing cleaver troubles me most, he continued, examining faint scratches on the cold room walls. Such a distinctive implement doesn't simply vanish. It requires either remarkable disposal ingenuity or access to methods unavailable to ordinary citizens. The beach sawdust suggests careful packing, my lord. Indeed. Our cleaver likely departed the premises in the same manner as Blackwood's most sensitive documents, wrapped with professional care and transported by someone whose movements would attract no suspicion. As they prepared to leave, the shop bell gave its familiar solitary chime, though no hand had touched the door. This time, however, Whimsy was positioned to observe the phenomenon directly. The sound originated not from normal mechanism operation, but from sympathetic vibration in the mounting bracket itself. Metal singing in harmony with St. Michael's distant quarter chime. Even in death, he observed with quiet satisfaction, Mr. Blackwood's establishment continues to provide instruction in applied acoustics. The question now becomes, who among our cast of desperate debtors possessed both the technical knowledge to orchestrate such mechanical precision and the professional access to dispose of evidence so thoroughly? The afternoon light was acquiring that golden quality peculiar to English autumn as they emerged from the shop. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began their evening call, and Whimsy found himself smiling with the particular satisfaction of a man who has just solved a complex equation. Tomorrow, Bunter, I believe we shall invite our suspects to witness a demonstration of how physics and desperation can be taught to dance together. It should prove quite illuminating. The midnight air possessed that crystalline quality peculiar to English autumn, when sound carries with unnatural clarity and shadows seem possessed of their own intentions. Within the butcher's shop, oil lamps cast steady circles of light that transform the familiar space into something approaching a theater, complete with audience, stage, and the promise of revelation. Ladies and gentlemen, Whimsy began, his voice carrying the measured authority of a professor about to demonstrate a particularly elegant theorem. We gather at this unseemly hour to witness the resurrection of Mr. Blackwood's final performance. Not his death, you understand, but the mechanical symphony that surrounded it. P.C. Hedges stood with official gravity near the door, his lantern casting additional illumination across the assembled witnesses. Dr. Meredith had arrived punctually, his medical bag suggesting professional duty rather than mere curiosity. Miss Penelope Thornbridge maintained her rigid composure, though her fingers betrayed nervous tension against her reticule. Mr. Grimshaw clutched his timepiece with the devotion of one whose existence revolved around temporal precision, while young Timothy hovered at the periphery with the intense absorption of youth witnessing adult mysteries. You will recall our initial puzzle, Whimsy continued, positioning himself beside the cold room door. A locked chamber, a deceased butcher, and mysterious bell ringing that suggested supernatural visitation. The village heard 3 distinct chimes at 8:30, yet no earthly visitor could be discovered. The solution, I submit, lies not in the realm of spirits, but in the considerably more reliable domain of applied physics. With Bunter's assistance, he began his preparations with theatrical precision. A block of ice, procured from Dr. Meredith's medical supplies, was positioned against the cold room door at the precise angle indicated by the chalk mark. The door remained ajar, held steady by the frozen weight. "Observe our mechanical accomplice," Whimsy said, adjusting the ice block with scientific care. Medical professionals understand the predictable nature of melting rates. A block of appropriate size will maintain this exact position for precisely the duration required. Then release the door to swing naturally to its acoustic position. Next came the missing cleaver, recovered through methods Whimsy chose not to elaborate upon, positioned with its handle resting on the floor and its blade wedged against the doorframe. The heavy implement held the door at the chalked angle with mathematical precision. "Mr. Grimshaw," Whimsy called, "if you would be so kind as to confirm St. Michael's current temporal condition." 7 minutes fast by Greenwich, my lord, the verger replied with professional pride. 1/4 past the hour arrives at 8 minutes past by true time. Excellent. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we shall permit the church to conduct our performance. As if summoned by theatrical necessity, St. Michael's quarter chime floated across the village green with ethereal clarity. Within the butcher's shop, the brass bell above the door responded with a ghostly tremor, its voice seeming to emerge from empty air itself. The assembled witnesses started collectively, several crossing themselves despite their rational intentions. "Physics courting mystery," Whimsy observed with quiet satisfaction. "The church bells provide our soundtrack, the door angle creates sympathetic resonance, and our cleaver maintains the precise acoustic chamber required. Yet this performance serves merely as misdirection, establishing false witness testimony while the actual deed occurred hours later." The half-hour chime arrived with its familiar melody, and again the shop bell sang its mechanical harmony, clearer now, as if gaining confidence in its supernatural role. Miss Thornbridge's composure cracked visibly, while P.C. Hedges found himself glancing nervously toward the door despite his rational knowledge that no ghost approached. 3 rings, Whimsy announced as the final chime faded. Precisely as testified by multiple witnesses, all swearing truthfully to marvels they had indeed observed. Yet note that all present remain visible, and no spectral visitor has materialized to work the bell. The hour itself brought St. Michael's full carillon, and the shop bell responded with its 3rd performance, fainter now as the ice began its inevitable surrender to temperature. Whimsy knelt beside the mechanism, demonstrating how the melting process gradually altered the door's position. "The temporal deception proves equally elegant," he explained, consulting his pocket watch. "Our murderer required witnesses to confirm mysterious activity at precisely 8:30, 8:23 by Greenwich time, while maintaining an unshakable alibi elsewhere. The ice mechanism provided that alibi, melting at medically predictable rates to trigger the acoustic sequence while the perpetrator remained safely distant." "But the locked room, my lord," P.C. Hedges protested. "The bolt was thrown from inside when we discovered the body." "Ah, Constable, observe the cleaver's secondary function." Whimsy demonstrated how the heavy blade, when positioned correctly and released by the melting ice, would fall with sufficient force to drive the bolt mechanism home. Our murderer required no supernatural assistance, merely an understanding of leverage, timing, and the cooperative nature of well-oiled hardware. As the ice continued its dissolution, the cleaver shifted position, and with a distinct metallic click, the cold room bolt slid into place. The door, now securely locked from within, had sealed itself through purely mechanical means. The locked room was not a mystery of entry, Whimsy concluded, but of delayed exit. The murderer departed hours before death occurred, leaving physics to provide both alibi and impossibility. Add systematic application of carbolic acid to eliminate forensic traces, and we have our sterile miracle. Dr. Meredith shifted uncomfortably in the lamplight. You suggest the entire village was deceived by ice and acoustics? I suggest, Doctor, that someone with intimate knowledge of both medical timing and village psychology orchestrated a performance worthy of the West End. The question now becomes, who possessed the professional expertise to calculate melting rates, the physical strength to position heavy cleavers with surgical precision, and the desperate motivation to risk such elaborate deception? The shop fell silent save for the distant ticking of St. Michael's clock and the soft drip of melting ice. In that silence, Whimsy's smile carried the quiet satisfaction of a mathematician who has just proven a particularly elegant theorem, while his audience contemplated the uncomfortable realization that their village ghost had possessed remarkably solid and decidedly human hands. The mechanical demonstration had achieved its intended effect, transforming supernatural mystery into comprehensible physics. Yet as the shop bell's final ghostly chime faded into silence, Whimsy observed his audience with the careful attention of a conductor preparing for the symphony's crescendo. The oil lamps cast shifting shadows that seemed to dance with the weight of approaching revelation. The acoustic performance, while charming, represents merely the overture. Whimsy began, his voice carrying that particular authority reserved for moments of absolute certainty. The true artistry lies not in mechanical misdirection, but in the creation of an alibi so comprehensive that the perpetrator's guilt becomes seemingly impossible to establish. He moved deliberately among his assembled audience, noting the subtle shifts in posture that betrayed guilty knowledge. Consider the expertise required for such elaborate deception. Our murderer needed intimate knowledge of village time-keeping peculiarities, the physics of acoustic resonance, and, most critically, the precise calculation of ice dissolution rates in controlled temperatures. Such knowledge suggests professional training in matters scientific and medical. Dr. Meredith shifted uncomfortably, his medical bag clutched with increasing tension. Surely, Lord Peter, you cannot suggest that medical training extends to criminal acoustics and mechanical timing. Not acoustics, Doctor, but something far more relevant, the predictable behavior of matter under controlled conditions. Ice melts at calculable rates depending on temperature, air circulation, and mass. A medical professional accustomed to precise dosages and timing would possess exactly the expertise required to orchestrate such temporal precision. Whimsy produced a small receipt from his waistcoat pocket. This invoice, discovered among your papers, records the delivery of an extra ice block to your surgery yesterday at 5 o'clock. Unusual, given the absence of meat requiring preservation in the village. When questioned, your supplier confirmed the specific request for a block of precise dimensions. Medical practices require ice for various purposes, Meredith protested, though his voice carried the hollow quality of a man watching carefully constructed defenses crumble. Indeed. Yet combined with your recent purchase of unusual quantities of carbolic acid, far exceeding normal medical requirements, and the beech sawdust found in your surgical waste container, a pattern emerges. Beech sawdust, Doctor, is used for packing delicate instruments during transport or disposal. The evidence accumulated with mathematical precision. The missing cleaver, wrapped in surgical bandage and packed with medical sawdust, had been incinerated in the surgery's clinical waste furnace, designed to reduce contaminated materials to sterile ash. The systematic application of carbolic acid had eliminated forensic traces while creating that distinctive institutional odor Meredith himself had noted. Your method was elegant in its simplicity, Whimsy continued, his tone carrying neither accusation nor sympathy, merely the inexorable weight of logic. You visited Blackwood during legitimate business hours, ostensibly for one of his scheduled appointments. The hidden ledger reveals your mounting debt. Medical supplies obtained during your wife's final illness, purchased at rates that exceeded your professional income. Miss Thornbridge drew herself up with rigid dignity. Surely, Lord Peter, You cannot suggest that financial difficulties justify such elaborate murder. Not financial difficulties alone, but the threat of professional destruction. Blackwood's correspondence reveals his intention to inform the medical board about certain controlled substances obtained through irregular channels. Your wife's suffering required medications beyond conventional prescription, and Blackwood had documented your desperation with characteristic thoroughness. The confession emerged in fragments as Meredith's composure finally surrendered. He had administered a carefully calculated dose of chloral hydrate, readily available from medical supplies, sufficient to ensure unconsciousness without immediate death. The ice block, positioned with surgical precision, maintained the door angle while gradually melting to trigger the acoustic sequence and ultimate mechanical locking. The timing required extraordinary precision, Whimsy explained to his fascinated audience. The sedative would render Blackwood unconscious within minutes, but death in the cold room would require approximately 2 hours. The ice block, calculated to melt completely in 90 minutes, would trigger the bell-ringing performance at precisely 8:30, while you maintained your unshakable alibi, delivering Mrs. Pritchard's child in Upper Stoke. Your professional reputation provided perfect camouflage, Whimsy added with quiet satisfaction. Who would suspect a doctor of such elaborate deception? Your presence at medical emergencies was beyond question, your knowledge of human physiology above suspicion, your access to chemicals and equipment entirely legitimate. P.C. Hedges stepped forward with official gravity, though his expression betrayed profound bewilderment at the complexity of village crime. Dr. Meredith, I must ask you to accompany me for formal questioning. Meredith nodded with the weary dignity of a man whose burdens had finally proved unbearable. I would request permission to complete my duties in Upper Stoke. Mrs. Pritchard's condition may yet require medical attention. Granted, Whimsy replied with characteristic courtesy. Duty must not quarrel with mercy, even under such circumstances. As they prepared to depart, the shop bell gave a final, solitary chime, though no hand had touched the door. Whimsy paused thoughtfully, adjusting his monocle as he contemplated the mechanical mysteries they had unraveled. The curious thing about elaborate deceptions, Bunter, he observed as they emerged into the crystalline autumn night, is their tendency to reveal more about human nature than simple crimes of passion. Our doctor created a masterpiece of misdirection, yet could not escape the fundamental truth that murder, however cleverly disguised, leaves traces that logic must eventually discover. The village of Little Wickham settled into its customary quiet, though the residents would spend many evenings discussing the extraordinary revelation that their respected physician had proven capable of such mechanical precision in matters of life and death. The butcher's shop remained silent, its mysteries finally resolved through the application of reason to the seemingly impossible. The morning light filtered through the surgery windows with that peculiar quality of English autumn, transforming the familiar space into something approaching a confessional. Dr. Meredith sat behind his desk with the composed dignity of a man who had finally laid down an unbearable burden, his medical instruments arranged with the same precision he had applied to more sinister purposes. Whimsy observed him with the careful attention of a scholar examining a particularly complex manuscript. The previous night's revelations had stripped away the elaborate mechanical deception, yet something in the doctor's manner suggested depths of motivation that transcended mere financial desperation. The curious thing about confession, Doctor, Whimsy began with characteristic gentleness, is its tendency to reveal truths more complex than the crimes they accompany. While our investigation has established the method with mathematical precision, the question of ultimate motivation remains somewhat atmospheric. Meredith's hands, steady as a surgeon's throughout their previous encounters, now trembled slightly as he closed his medical bag with final precision. Motivation, Lord Peter? I suppose financial ruin provides insufficient explanation for such elaborate artistry. Precisely. Simple poisoning would have achieved death with considerably less risk. Your acoustic symphony suggests motivations rather more personal. The doctor's composure cracked like ice under sudden pressure. It began with Eleanor, my wife. Her illness was protracted and agonizing. Conventional remedies offered little comfort, so I sought alternatives through irregular channels. Morphine derivatives, experimental compounds, anything that might ease her suffering. Blackwood discovered my procurement methods through his network of informants. He began lending you money. Initially, yes. Small sums secured against my practice, then larger amounts as my desperation grew. But when Eleanor died, I thought it would end. Instead, Blackwood revealed the true scope of his leverage. Meredith's voice carried the weight of accumulated grief and sleepless nights. He possessed her private correspondence, letters she had written during her final weeks, begging me to end her suffering when pain became unbearable. Whimsy's expression grew thoughtful. Letters that could be interpreted as evidence of conspiracy. Precisely. Eleanor understood her condition with medical precision, and she asked for release when suffering overwhelmed dignity. I could not grant her request, professional oath, legal constraints, simple cowardice. But Blackwood threatened to publish her correspondence, suggesting it demonstrated criminal conspiracy to assist suicide. The terrible arithmetic of human desperation began to clarify. Blackwood had possessed not merely evidence of irregular medical practice, but documentation that would destroy both professional reputation and a beloved wife's posthumous dignity. He offered to preserve her memory in exchange for permanent financial cooperation. Meredith continued. I was to become his perpetual debtor, paying tribute to protect her reputation. The alternative was public scandal that would paint her final days as sordid conspiracy rather than dignified suffering. And so you planned his elimination with scientific precision. I am a man of science, Lord Peter. Impulse serves lesser minds. I required certainty, not merely Blackwood's death, but the destruction of his power to harm Eleanor's memory. The ice calculations, the acoustic timing, the carbolic sterilization, all designed to create an unimpeachable supernatural explanation while I maintained perfect alibi. Meredith looked toward the window, where morning light revealed the village continuing its daily routines. The 3-bell chimes were deliberate sentiment. Eleanor Margaret Meredith, her initials. If the village believed in ghostly visitation, let them imagine her spirit had found justice. You destroyed his files. I burned what threatened innocent people. Miss Thornbridge's arithmetic difficulties, estate inheritance questions, medical supply irregularities. Blackwood had constructed comprehensive files on village vulnerability. His death alone was insufficient. The documents required elimination to prevent posthumous damage. P.C. Hedges shifted uncomfortably near the door. Doctor, I must formally place you under arrest for the murder of Silas Blackwood. Meredith nodded with weary acceptance. I understand, Constable. Though I would request permission to complete my rounds. Mrs. Patterson requires monitoring, and professional obligations should not suffer for personal failures. Granted, Whimsy replied, rising with characteristic courtesy. Though I suspect, Doctor, that your patients would consider your actions less failure than fierce loyalty. Love, however misguided in expression, possesses its own moral arithmetic. As they prepared to depart, Meredith touched a framed photograph of a woman whose eyes held both intelligence and infinite sadness. Eleanor would have disapproved of my methods, Lord Peter. She believed in facing difficulties with dignity rather than elaborate deception. But she would have understood the necessity of protecting what little dignity remained to us. The morning light continued its steady progression across Little Wickham, illuminating truths both comfortable and disturbing. In the end, the most complex mysteries often revealed the simplest human motivations. Love protecting itself through whatever means desperate necessity demanded. The week that followed possessed that peculiar quality of English villages digesting scandal. a collective process of intellectual mastication that transforms shocking revelation into acceptable local history. Little Wickham had discovered that respectability, like good beef, benefits from proper aging before consumption, though the initial taste proved rather more bitter than anticipated. Wimsey found himself making final rounds with the methodical precision of a physician checking his patient's recovery. Jeremiah Potts, restored to his turnips with official apologies, received the news of his vindication with characteristic dourness. "Justice delayed," Potts observed, leaning on his hoe with philosophical resignation, "is like meat left too long in the sun. It nourishes nobody and offends everyone. Still, I'm grateful for your persistence, Lord Peter. Truth may arrive late, but it travels better than lies." "Indeed, Mr. Potts, though I suspect you'll find the village rather more respectful of your opinions in future. Nothing enhances a man's reputation quite like being wrongfully accused and subsequently vindicated." Miss Penelope Thornbridge, encountered arranging flowers in the church with military precision, had managed the remarkable feat of appearing unchanged while being entirely transformed. "The parish accounts are now managed by committee, Lord Peter," she announced with the satisfaction of one who has discovered virtue through necessity. "Transparency, it seems, proves less painful than anticipated, though I confess surprise at the congregation's generosity when presented with honest arithmetic. Honesty," Wimsey observed, "is like good butchery. Initially shocking to observe, but ultimately more nourishing than the alternatives." Mr. Grimshaw discovered polishing saint. Michael's clockwork, with renewed devotion, had elected to maintain the 7-minute advancement that had proved so crucial to their investigation. "The village has grown fond of arriving early to its appointments," he explained with shy pride. "Besides, punctuality is a virtue, even when achieved through mechanical eccentricity." Dr. Meredith's departure had been accomplished with the quiet dignity befitting a man whose crime, however elaborate, sprang from love rather than malice. The village found itself in the uncomfortable position of mourning both victim and perpetrator, a moral complexity that would provide conversational sustenance for years to come. "The curious thing about our recent drama, Bunter," Wimsey observed as they loaded the Daimler with characteristic efficiency, "is how it illuminated the various forms of hunger that drive human behavior. Blackwood fed upon desperation, offering financial sustenance at rates that ultimately consumed his clients. Dr. Meredith, in turn, fed upon the need to preserve his wife's dignity, an appetite so powerful it transformed a healer into an ingenious killer. Indeed, my lord, one might say the village has learned to distinguish between nourishment and mere consumption." The butcher's shop stood empty, its brass bell finally silent after providing such memorable musical accompaniment to murder. A discreet notice announced, "Premises available," though Wimsey suspected Little Wickham would require considerable time before accepting another purveyor of meat, given recent associations between butchery and betrayal. P.C. Hedges approached with the satisfied expression of a man whose understanding of village crime had undergone significant expansion. "All sorted proper, Lord Peter, though I confess this case has rather altered my perspective on rural policing. Ice blocks and church bells, who would have credited such sophistication in Little Wickham? The beauty of village mysteries, Constable, lies in their resourcefulness. Urban criminals possess access to elaborate equipment, while country murderers must improvise with ecclesiastical timing and agricultural implements. There's something refreshingly honest about such practical creativity." As they prepared for departure, the afternoon light acquired that golden quality peculiar to English autumn, when shadows possess definite edges and truth seems temporarily more palatable than usual. The village had begun its slow process of metabolizing uncomfortable revelations, transforming shock into story, scandal into cautionary tale. "Tell me, Bunter," Wimsey said, settling into the Daimler with characteristic precision, "what strikes you as the most significant lesson from our theatrical education?" If I may venture an observation, my lord, it would be that the most elaborate deceptions cannot ultimately disguise the fundamental human motivations that inspire them. Dr. Meredith's acoustic symphony was remarkable in its complexity, yet his desire to protect his wife's memory remained touchingly simple. Precisely. We have witnessed the transformation of grief into geometry, love into logistics. Yet beneath all that mechanical precision lay the eternal struggle between duty and devotion, law and loyalty. Whimsy adjusted his driving gloves with scholarly satisfaction. Rather like butchery itself, the application of sharp instruments to achieve necessary ends, however unpalatable the process. As little Wickham receded in their mirror, its mysteries resolved, but its character forever altered. Whimsy found himself humming a fragment of melody not unlike the church bells that had provided such memorable soundtrack to their recent drama. "One final observation, Bunter," he said as they crested the hill that would carry them beyond village boundaries. Blackwood's shop bore the legend Family Butchers, yet in the end, it was family loyalty that proved his undoing. There's something almost classical about such ironic justice. Indeed, my lord, though I suspect the village will prefer simpler sustenance in future, both moral and culinary. The Daimler purred contentedly toward new mysteries, leaving little Wickham to digest its uncomfortable feast of truth with whatever philosophical seasoning time and gossip might provide.